The steel gates of the Grand Peanut Butter Factory loomed overhead, casting long, jagged shadows across the pavement. Soma, Sora, and Nia stood at the threshold, the metal of their new security badges pressing cold against their chests. They stepped inside, the heavy doors locking behind them with a final, echoing thud. For 3 weeks, the routine had been absolute. They walked the same grid, checked the same locks, and monitored the same silent, humming aisles of the production floor. The air inside was thick, saturated with the heavy, cloying scent of roasted peanuts and industrial grease. Every hour, the machinery pulsed. Sora checked the perimeter sensors. Nia logged the shift status on her tablet. Soma paced the catwalks, his boots clicking rhythmically. Nothing ever changed. The factory was a fortress of efficiency, operating with a mechanical precision that left no room for error. They had no reason to suspect that the silence was hiding a secret, or that the routine they followed so carefully was about to be shattered. The rhythm changed on the 22nd day. A dull, rhythmic thumping began to vibrate through the floorboards near the primary mixing vat. Soma stopped mid-stride, his head tilting toward the source. It was not the steady hum of the machinery. It was heavy, wet, and inconsistent. He signaled for Sora and Nia to hold their position while he moved toward the massive steel container. The vat towered 10 feet above him, its surface a swirling golden sludge that churned with a thick, viscous resistance. He climbed the maintenance ladder, his hands gripping the cold rungs, and hauled himself up to the rim. The smell was overwhelming, a sharp, metallic tang cutting through the scent of peanuts. He leaned over, peering into the swirling gold. A clump of dark hair bobbed against the surface, caught in the slow, mechanical drag of the mixer. Soma reached down, his fingers sinking into the warm, sticky paste. He grabbed the hair and pulled. The substance resisted, clinging to the object, but he braced his feet and yanked with all his strength. A pale, lifeless hand broke the surface, limp and stained. The thumping stopped. Soma recoiled, his boots slipping on the metal grating. He stared at the hand, then back at his team. The silence of the factory was gone. The factory doors slammed shut behind them as the three sprinted toward the exit. Their boots hammered against the pavement, a frantic rhythm that echoed through the empty lot. They did not stop until they reached the neon-lit entrance of the detective office. Soma kicked the door open, his chest heaving, and they stumbled inside. The office was dim, smelling of stale coffee and old paper. Mint looked up from her desk, her eyes narrowing as she took in their disheveled state. They did not speak. They didn't have to. Soma gestured toward the door, his hands still trembling from the contact with the sludge. Mint stood, her movements sharp and deliberate. She walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out a thick manila folder, and slammed it onto the desk with a heavy thud. She grabbed a marker and scrawled, "The Peanut Butter Factory cases" across the front in bold black letters. The investigation had officially begun. Mint locked the office door, turned back to the folder, and began to organize the evidence. Dusk settled over the factory, turning the steel structure into a jagged silhouette against the fading sky. The trio approached the perimeter, moving low through the shadows of the loading docks. Sora and Nia peeled away, slipping toward the secondary gate to draw the attention of the night watch. Soma waited until the guard's flashlight swept past the corner, then lunged toward the manager's office. He reached the heavy door, his fingers tracing the lock mechanism. He jammed a tension tool into the cylinder and twisted. The lock clicked. He slipped inside, the room smelling of ozone and floor wax. He moved to the desk, his hands sweeping beneath the wood. His fingertips brushed against a strip of adhesive tape. He pulled, and a small metallic USB drive dropped into his palm. He tucked the drive into his pocket and pressed his back against the wall, listening. Outside, a shout echoed as Sora and Nia executed their distraction. Back in the office, the screen flickered to life. The video file played, revealing the suspect in the act. His face twisted in a sneer as he forced the victim into the vat. Mint pointed to the timestamp. They had minutes before he vanished. The team scrambled into the car, tires screeching against the asphalt as they raced toward the central station. They arrived to a wall of steam and noise. The locomotive was already shuddering, the iron wheels grinding against the tracks. Soma spotted the suspect boarding the last car. The train lurched forward, gaining speed with every rotation of the pistons. They sprinted across the platform, their boots pounding against the concrete. The gap between the platform and the metal steps of the rear carriage widened. Sora jumped first, fingers locking onto the cold railing. Nia followed, swinging her weight to clear the platform edge. Soma took the final leap, his boots skidding on the wet metal before he found his footing. The station lights blurred into streaks of white as the train accelerated into the dark tunnel. They were on board, the iron floor vibrating beneath them, the wind whipping through the narrow corridor. The hunt had moved from the office to the tracks, and the suspect was only a few doors away. The door to the carriage groaned as Soma kicked it open. They stepped into a narrow, dimly lit corridor that vibrated with the roar of the tracks. Before they could advance, 2 guards lunged from the shadows, slamming them against the metal walls. The air in the corridor was thick with the smell of grease and ozone. Nia ducked a wild swing, drove her elbow into the guard's ribs, and shoved him back. The train lurched violently, throwing everyone off balance. Sora grappled with the second guard, their bodies colliding against the window frame. Glass rattled in its casing. Soma saw an opening and lunged forward, but a heavy fist caught him in the shoulder, sending him spinning into a storage locker. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the sharp pain, and tackled the guard into the floorboards. The corridor became a chaotic blur of limbs and grunts. Every time the train swayed, they slammed into the walls, the metal echoing with the force of the struggle. They fought for every inch of space, desperate to reach the next door. The suspect was just ahead, but the guards held the line with brutal efficiency. Sweat stung their eyes. Fists flew in the confined space, each strike landing with a dull thud. The suspect backed away, his hand hovering over a small device. He pressed the button. A deafening roar tore through the carriage as the C4 charges detonated beneath the floorboards. The metal frame groaned, twisted, and then sheared away from the rest of the train. The corridor vanished in a flash of orange light. Soma, Sora, and Nia were thrown backward as the floor tilted violently. The carriage plummeted, spinning into the void. Gravity took hold. The wind screamed through the shattered windows, drowning out their shouts. They hit the dark water with the force of a falling boulder. The ocean surged into the cabin, cold and suffocating. Soma kicked against the submerged debris, his lungs burning, and clawed his way toward the surface. He broke the water, gasping for air, and saw the wreckage sinking into the depths. Sora and Nia surfaced nearby, dragging themselves onto the jagged rocks. They collapsed on the wet sand, shivering, watching the suspect's train disappear. The tracker on his jacket remained active. Soma tapped the tablet, the blue dot pulsing steadily against the dark map. They pushed the vehicle to its limit, tires screaming as they swerved into the private airfield. Ahead, the suspect sprinted toward a waiting jet. The engines began to whine, a high-pitched drone that vibrated through the ground. They were too far to intercept on foot. Suddenly, the darkness of the tarmac was shattered by a wall of red and blue light. Nancy's cruisers tore through the perimeter fence, sirens wailing in a deafening chorus. The suspect froze at the base of the stairs, his hand reaching for the railing. He looked back, his face twisting as the police vehicles boxed in the runway. Officers poured out of the cruisers, weapons drawn, shouting commands that were swallowed by the roar of the jet turbines. The suspect turned to bolt, but he was too slow. 2 officers slammed into him, driving him hard into the cold concrete. He struggled, thrashing against the weight, but the handcuffs clicked shut. The high-pitched whine of the jet turbines faltered, dropping in pitch until it became a low, rhythmic thrumming that shook the chest. Slowly, the massive blades lost their momentum, spinning down into a mechanical death rattle. The roar that had dominated the airfield vanished, replaced by the sharp, rhythmic clicking of cooling metal. Silence rushed back into the space, heavy and absolute. The suspect lay face down on the concrete, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps against the grit. Nancy walked forward, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the lingering haze of exhaust. She stopped beside the suspect, her boots clicking sharply on the tarmac. Soma, Sora, and Nia approached from the perimeter, their movements sluggish with exhaustion. They stood in a semicircle, watching the suspect struggle against the steel cuffs. The factory case, which had begun with a discovery in a dark vat, had finally reached its end here on the cold runway. There was no triumph in the air, only the clinical finality of justice. The suspect stopped thrashing, his body going limp against the ground. Nancy signaled the transport team, and the officers hauled him to his feet, his head hanging low. The jet sat motionless, a hollow shell of his failed escape. The sirens had died away, leaving only the distant, steady hum of the city. The mission was complete. They turned away from the tarmac, leaving the suspect in the hands of the law, and walked toward the edge of the airfield as the first light of dawn began to bleed across the horizon.